podcast is brought to you by Azerion. Azerion is one of the world's leading full-stack digital advertising partners for 300 plus agencies and 2,500 plus brands. Their proprietary platform called Azerion Infinity seamlessly integrates the capabilities of owned and operated DSP, SSP, DMP, and ad server technology to drive incremental performance value and efficiency across the full marketing funnel. At Azerion, they offer custom audience activation, leveraging cookie identity data and contextual signals to engage users across digital, CTV, OLV, DOOH, audio, in-game channels, everywhere else. Choose between direct or PMP activation, leveraging world-class trading teams to deliver top-of-plan results, or alternatively, access audiences through a data-connected PMP as a market leader in the sell-side curation category. That's Azerion, the sponsor of this podcast. Welcome to the Marketecture Podcast. I'm Ari Paparo. I'm joined by Eric Franchi, and our guest today is Andrew Lipsman. He is an independent analyst, formerly at eMarketer, Comscore, and NPD, and now he runs a Substack that's focused entirely on retail media. So he has a lot of really interesting insights about retail media. You can find him at mediaadsandcommerce.substack.com, or you can just Google Andrew Lipsman. It'd probably be easier. So, Eric, what are you looking to hear from Andrew?
A few things. So Andrew is really deep in this stuff. So I want to just kind of get his take on the ecosystem broadly, like the role of Amazon versus Walmart versus this long tail that is developing, and like what's the opportunity. I want to hear him talk about TV, and I want to hear him talk about the in-store opportunity, because there's just like so many interesting things in retail media, and like it's increasingly fragmented, and I think he's got a good 30,000 foot view on all of it.
And then we have the news this week. We have a lot of Washington, D.C. news, which was never fun. And the Aussie media guy finally is going to jail. So that's fun. In terms of some housekeeping, so next week is Christmas. We're not going to record an episode. We will be back with our year-end predictions and all of that good stuff. Probably like the 30th or so. Sometime right before New Year's, we'll probably drop that. So look forward to it. And then I'll be at CES. Will you be at CES, Eric?
I'll be at CES.
Should people like text you and get on your calendar? Probably 5 million little startups want to meet with you, right?
My calendar is absolutely full, but yeah, hit me up. If you got something interesting to say, I'll always make room.
How do you get your attention? You got to see you at the craps table or something?
No, the best way to get to me is to hit up Ari Paparo.
No, that is not true. Because that is the most common way to get to you, but it's not the best. It's very inefficient. A lot of loss in that channel.
DMs are always open, folks. DMs are always open.
All right, let's get going with Andrew Lipsman.
Let's do it.
Andrew Lipsman, thank you for being here. We're excited to hear from you.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
I described you as sort of an expert analyst on retail media, commerce media. Is that fair about what you've been working on?
I think that's fair. I've been in all forms of digital media, advertising, and commerce for quite some time, but those things intersected pretty nicely in retail media. I saw what was happening with Amazon about 5 years ago, picked up the ball on it, and obviously it's grown into a pretty big thing at this point.
Do you care for the term retail media versus commerce media, or you don't care?
I'm all in on retail media. Commerce media has a place, but to me, I distinguish it in being the other forms of commerce like travel, financial. But, to me, the epicenter is always going to be retail.
Okay, so what's going on? What's the state of retail media right now?
The state of retail media overall is really strong. It continues to grow 20%, give or take, year over year. But that's heavily driven by Amazon, which is like 75% of the market, and Walmart, which is about another 10%. So whatever they're doing is what the overall market's going to be doing. Walmart's been growing at close to 30% lately. So they're really firing on all cylinders, and Amazon continues to grow around 20%. Everyone else, it's really a mixed bag. And actually, I would say within the last year, more mediocre stories or signs of flat growth or even some negative growth than I've heard in the past.
How close are those percentages to their market share in e-commerce?
Disproportionate. Amazon, 75% in retail media, but about 40% in e-commerce.
Right. So why are they doing so well?
Well, I mean, they've got a 10-year head start on everyone else for the most part. And this is how big platforms work. When you can prove return on ad spend with a very long tail of advertisers, they keep investing and investing until they can't do it anymore or it doesn't make sense anymore. So Amazon is just more penetrated, more saturated than other platforms. But I would say a lot of other retailers have the same potential relative to their scale.
Does it really matter, the market share, or is really the question of how much of an individual retailer's margin comes from this source and how that's growing relative to the margin from their traditional business?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of the equation. So for the marketplace businesses, they generally are going to have healthier margins than most brick and mortar retailers. So the margin profile of ads obviously is so much stronger, but it's maybe less accretive there. But for brick and mortar retailers, you only have to generate an incremental 1, 2, maybe 3% of revenue before it becomes really meaningful. And in fact, Walmart has started to nod to Walmart Connect as being a big driver of their expanding margins in the last few quarters.
If you're a Walmart, this is, a total game changer opportunity. But if you're like a small retailer, like a Wawa or something like that, isn't every dollar of retail media helpful? Or is there some problem where you're so small that buyers aren't going to be willing to play ball?
I think there's a very long tail and mid tail that is, I would say, they have inventory that is useful and they should monetize, but they should not expect to be a walled garden retail media network. They shouldn't be the front door. If you're a C-store, for example, most C-stores should probably get aggregated and you can do buys across all of that media. It should be a nice little additional incremental revenue stream at a nice margin, but it's not going to be a game changer for most of those businesses.
What are the options for aggregation? Are there, if I had a convenience store, a regional convenience store, and I wanted to get some retail media, how would I do that?
Yeah, I mean, there's some players sniffing around the space. There's what I call ecosystem RMNs. So where you have a lot of retailers that independently aren't big enough to really monetize on their own or be a walled garden. Regional grocery is kind of the big prize. You have a player like Instacart, for example, that's trying to come in and be the scaffolding for all of those players, help them monetize and obviously take their cut. C-stores, there's a couple of players who are also trying to aggregate. They have to act as the data spine and then obviously aggregate all that inventory and make it easy for the brands to buy.
Did you have any names? Like, is Criteo a player here or is Criteo more hard goods?
Criteo definitely aggregates demand, and it sort of remains to be seen what part of the ecosystem they'll focus on aggregating.
What about niche retailers? So let's, or if not niche, concentrated ones, like if you're Dick's Sporting Goods, those brands probably feel that retailer is very important to them, even if they're not the largest in the world. Isn't that a viable opportunity for both sides?
100%. I mean, I think there's been this idea that there's too many retail media networks and, there's going to have to be this huge consolidation. I will say there are actually surprisingly more walled garden opportunities than you might think. That begins with all the big players in grocery. You're easily at half a dozen or 8. Then all the category leaders, so Dick's, Best Buy, Home Depot, all of these are players that are very, very relevant and should be the front door for buys within advertisers in their category. You get the commerce intermediaries like Instacart, DoorDash, Uber. It's actually not hard to get up to at least 20 and maybe 30 viable players in this game. And then the rest, ultimately kind of become that dumb inventory.
Right. Or maybe they glom on to one of their competitors. Maybe a local sporting goods could participate in Dick's Marketplace in some way.
Yeah. And that's an opportunity for some of these category leaders is they can then become the scaffolding for everyone else. So it'll be interesting to see if some of them go in that direction.
But what are the challenges these retailers have? Like a lot of them aren't staffed to do this sort of thing. So what are you seeing in the marketplace?
They are not media companies. And so it's not a core competency. The organizations live and breathe retail and in many cases don't get media. The ones who are getting it and building nice organizations at this point have been at it for quite some time and had stumbles along the way. I mean, Walmart Connect, like I said, is doing great now, but they were stumbling for years before they started to figure it out. So I think every RMN really has to go through that process. And then talent. I mean, there is a scarcity of talent to staff all of these. You have a lot of RMNs right now that frankly don't really have very many media and advertising people today. So I think some of them are going to have a tougher road than others.
While you were on Walmart, the Vizio deal closed, I think, last week. Yeah. What's your take?
Biggest news story of the year in retail media. I think it was super smart strategically. They've been kind of modeling what Amazon has built. Amazon's built this unbelievable retail media flywheel. based around media, ads, and commerce. And the one piece that retailers tend not to have is the media component, right? And that really helps give you that scale. So they have to do it through partnership or acquire inventory. Amazon has more of its owned and operated inventory. Walmart doesn't quite have that yet. And so Vizio was a way to buy its way into CTV. They're obviously partnered with Disney and NBCU as well, but they have great data to be able to plug into high quality inventory. And when you bring that closed loop apparatus to, traditional TV buys, I think it's going to completely transform TV. We're entering the era of performance TV.
Do you think attribution's the key lever there?
100%, right? Dollars follow attribution all the time. This is the story of digital. And we've never seen, I think, the level of disruption like we're about to see. And for good and bad, one of the things is that dollars will follow those attribution metrics in TV, in consumer goods, for example. What I worry about is TV really work from a branding standpoint. And I worry that once we put the performance blinders on, we lose sight of the branding effects. And I just think that's so critical to these upper funnel media.
One thing I made a point on this show probably a couple times, I'm wondering your take, is that Amazon, obviously amazing assets, especially Fire TV, but Whole Foods doesn't fit very well because Whole Foods doesn't carry a lot of mainstream brands. Agree, disagree?
Agree. Amazon Fresh, that concept was built, I think, primarily for the purposes of advertising. Carry those national brands so that they have that offline data to power their advertising apparatus and then see the attribution. That's why they had to have everything understood at the SKU level. And so they were also building in-store media into those stores. Now, those stores have stumbled and they've had to retool and figure it out. They haven't been able to scale like they wanted to. So what's their scaled footprint today? It's Whole Foods. So they're actually doing a lot more in-store advertising there. They're just limited in the number of brands, right? They're not going to be advertising Coca-Cola.
Yeah, it seems like if they could wave a magic wand and have Publix or Safeway instead of Whole Foods, they'd be in a much better position.
It would be a much smarter play. I agree.
We go back to TV for a second. You made an interesting point where it's like good and bad if performance marketers figure out how to make TV work and start pouring money into it. As a, maybe more for you, Ari, as a programmatic purist, does this matter, right? Like, will the highest yield win? And maybe it will be brand, maybe it will be performance. Like, what's your take on that?
My take is there's some disadvantages to the brand side because the data feedback loop is so much slower, right? So you always have to have some measure of faith or estimation when you're trying to build a new brand or raise awareness. It might take weeks to figure out if it works. Whereas direct, you have much faster feedback loops.
Does that make measurement like MMM, companies in that category like that much more interesting in this new era? Does it make like, new metrics like attention we've been talking about? Does it give some tailwinds to that?
Yeah, I want to hear Andrew's take, but my just quick take is that MMM is the slowest of all the measurement opportunities out there. You're talking about annual reviews in some cases, right? So that sort of is related to the point I make.
Yeah, the basic attribution window that we've had in digital advertising, it's got to be a little bit longer by default for TV because you can't transact right away. So it's going to probably be at least a week and longer in most cases. I think that mechanism alone, all the other things you mentioned are going to continue to be important. Now, one of the reasons I'm so optimistic on performance TV and why it's such a big market opportunity is TV's always been the domain of major national advertisers for the most part. We've never seen the SMBs partake in TV advertising in the past. And I had this kind of light bulb moment a year or so ago. I was watching Amazon Freevee for the first time. I was watching Jury Duty. And I started to see a bunch of my ads were for like pet brands and specifically dogs. I have a dog. So I was like, oh, they're definitely targeting me as a dog owner. And then I started to get some ads for independent brands of dental dog chews. And I looked it up. I was like, they're not owned by Nestle Purina or any big marketer. And I realized all of a sudden, this advertiser would never be advertising on TV, but they're being brought into the fold. And especially with creative services and things that an Amazon can enable, I just think the threshold is much lower. And all of a sudden, we're just going to see this massive long tail enter into TV and TV-like advertising.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's an exciting time.
Both Eric and I have invested in that area as well. It's just, the creative side has always been the challenge for TV advertisers. I mean, think about all the cheesy commercials that local cable spots would make. And that's an example of how the barrier to entry was for local advertisers, small advertisers, and AI goes a long way to solve those problems.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the potential of Gen AI to create great creative. But if you haven't ever been doing video creative and you just need something that passes a minimum bar, I think it can absolutely do that for some of these brands.
Yeah, I think that's right. And they could grow into larger budgets as well with real production values. So what's going on in social? How does social play into retail media? I, as a TikTok user here and there, not a producer, but I look at it and there's just so much crap being sold. There's so much stuff that's commercially oriented. Is that part of the equation here?
Yeah, I mean, retail media is part of a bigger conversation around the convergence of media and commerce. And so we're seeing it on social platforms. I think where retail media plugs into social media, it's pretty interesting because one of the reasons why retail media is valuable is in most cases, what people are shopping for and buying is the best data, the best first party data to use for targeting. And then obviously the platforms have the scale. So you bring those two things together, as long as you're reaching real inventory, you're going to get high performing media. So I think that's why you're seeing a lot of these RMN and social media platform partnerships.
Well, is it fair? I'm just thinking out loud here. Is it fair to say that like a lot of commerce that happens in social media is like the Temu kind of stuff, like, direct to consumer, drop ship, stuff like that. But there's an opportunity for it to migrate to being real products that are fulfilled by traditional retailers.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen the D2C trend for years, so that's already been happening. I just think it can take a step up in terms of better qualifying audiences based on other mechanisms, other forms of targeting, and we'll be able to understand better where the transaction happens. And so one of the things I think about a lot is some of the biggest companies today, Amazon, Google, Meta, they have these huge valuations, and it's primarily derived from e-commerce sales. There's the other 85% of retail sales that are happening in stores, and they haven't really been well attributed yet. We're entering into an era, retail media is going to be at the center of it, where we'll start to be able to attribute a lot of that. So I just think about the types of businesses that will be created out of that, and it's pretty considerable.
Well, that's really bullish for the big tech companies because only, 10-20% of all commerce in the US is e-commerce. So if that went up to 70 or 80%, or if they influence 70 or 80%, that would make their businesses 3 or 4 times larger.
Yeah, but they also, their disadvantage in most cases is that they don't have that visibility. They don't own that data. They don't have the best data anymore, right? Behavioral data was the dominant form in the last era. Commerce data is in the next era. So Amazon, yes, they're well positioned, but Walmart, Kroger, all these huge retailers have enormous amounts of purchase data.
Right. This is a little off topic, but any take on the Chick-fil-A app that was reported to be developed that's all like, entertainment?
It's convergence of content and commerce. Maybe it's a sign of things to come. I think probably not. I think they'll probably walk away from it soon. Problem with all these things is like, it's hard to get people to consume content. There's so many choices and it has to be good. Quibi was very well.
Quibi was a good idea. Quibi was a good idea. It was poor execution.
And guess what? The content didn't pass muster, so they didn't get an audience.
I love Quibi. What's going on in the physical stores? What are the advantages to retail to having physical stores, and what are they doing?
Well, they have a huge opportunity sitting in front of them that they've been, I would say, poorly capitalizing on to date for in-store retail media. In-store digital ads. I mean, to me, it's like staring everyone in the face that this should be one of the best forms of advertising of all time, right? You have the potential for high quality media close to the point of purchase where most purchase happens. Why wouldn't brands want to invest there? It's getting off the ground very slowly. It's only a few $100 million market. I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be tens of billions in the coming years. A lot of infrastructure needs to come in. We need measurement and all the things that support new ad markets. But these are scaled audiences. They're huge. Walmart gets 200 million people a month. Target another 100 million. These are broadcast level audiences. And TV dollars haven't had somewhere better to go for a long time. I think this is a place where some of those TV dollars should frankly move into.
What is the format that you think wins? Is it just TV ads on screens at the point of purchase? Like what how are you thinking about that?
Not at all. It's short form attention. So, you're always going to want to have contextually relevant creative over time, but like what's the right creative if you were just to repurpose something that already exists? It's probably something closer to TikTok ads, short form video, eye catching, put the brand front and center, make it quick, and just create that momentary desire or awareness before they might actually purchase. Over time, I think you'll be able to do much more creative things across multiple screens in the store that take full advantage of it. But I think there's a quicker path here to pretty effective creative in store.
These are like end caps, shop checkout screens, things like that.
All of the above. You can have them at the store entrance. You can have them deli counter, pharmacy, around the store periphery. And the funny thing is, the US is so far behind the rest of the world. Go to Asia, Europe. Tesco is a great example. In the UK, they've got screens all over the place, really nicely executed. And I think it's going to mature into a great business for them. The big retailers here, they haven't done it yet. Walmart, they're starting to talk more about in-store media, but their two primary placements right now are at the self-checkout screen, which is pretty late in the purchase process, and the TV wall, which is kind of nice, maybe for non-endemic advertisers. But if I'm a CPG brand, it's not the first place that I'd want to be buying ads.
Any thoughts on that disaster that happened? I forget the name of the company. The disastrous thing with the screens that showed you what was in the coolers.
Cooler screens. I worked there briefly.
Oh, you did? Oh, okay.
Yes, I did. I ran marketing there for a hot minute in 2021. And part of it was, being attracted to the thesis of the potential of in-store ads. I think the key learning out of that is it created a CX issue when you have a surface
being consumer experience.
Consumer experience, yeah. And you can't disrupt that in retail. When you have an opaque surface in between the consumer and the product, it can create a problem. So big learning. There's lots of surfaces that won't disrupt the consumer experience, and I think they'll do just fine.
My last question. I had an interesting conversation with a guy from DoorDash at Advertising Week. I interviewed him, and I thought it was interesting that they're committed to a CPA model. And I think a lot of the other retail medias are more of a CPC model. Can you give us some thoughts on that? Am I right? Are there trends? How should we think about that?
Yeah, everyone may have to try and have a different playbook. I think DoorDash is unique enough, and they have a certain set of advertisers that they're really strong with, where these are local restaurant merchants, and they're not used to spending ad dollars, and so kind of makes sense for DoorDash to just de-risk that for them with the CPA model. They may have opportunities to provide different options. Most of the other retailers are going to kind of follow the same script. You don't want to be too unique, or you just become harder to buy.
Right. But most commonly, it's a CPC model.
Most commonly, yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that, I think we're going to call it and take a break, and we'll come back in a minute with the news of the week. A lot of interesting stuff going on in regulatory and in Washington, D.C. So, Andrew, thank you for sharing your retail media insights.
Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by InMobi. With the average person spending more than 5 hours a day on their phone, you have to ask yourself, what's your mobile strategy? InMobi Advertising helps brands and publishers thrive in the modern mobile era with AI-powered solutions to acquire, monetize, and delight the right users at scale at each step in their journey. From a pioneering DSP built to accelerate app growth in a privacy-first world, to a leading exchange, and SSP Forrester just named a mobile must-have, InMobi Advertising has the tools to capture user attention on their most personal device. Check out their Spotlight series on the Advertising Forum for key strategies to mobilize in 2025, and visit go.inmobi.com/pod. That's go.inmobi.com/pod to learn more. InMobi, driving real connections.
And we're back. We got a bunch of news this week. Actually, a lot more than usual out of DC and the regulatory space, as well as some stuff around AppLovin, Apple, maybe a little bit more if we have time. You started off the week with a cryptic tweet saying something to the effect of, there will be news.
Yeah.
And I was all excited. And was that news delivered? Did you expect something around Google antitrust or something else?
Yeah. So there's a lot of buzz. I was expecting. It's Thursday. We're recording this, so maybe by the time you hear this, the news will be different. But a lot of folks are expecting both the US and European ad tech decisions to drop this week. People don't pay enough attention to Europe because Europe just does whatever it wants. But the European Union has pretty much already found Google to be guilty. They don't use the word guilty, but there was findings that they were a monopoly, and there was a rumor. Reuters published a story in September that Google had already offered to spin out AdX as a separate company to make the Europeans happy. So Google would only do that if they already felt like they were really back against the wall and they're negotiating. So the European final decision, which they even have this graphic that's really comical of a scissors cutting off Google's publisher ad server that they posted as for the use of the press. It's like the silliest little graphic.
That's aggressive.
So they're pretty serious. I don't have any information that it will come out this week, but I had heard that it might. And the U.S. antitrust, we know that the judge said specifically she wanted to get out before the end of the year. And there's not much time left for that. So I'm waiting, refreshing Twitter, hoping for some news.
We might have an emergency pod if that's
emergency pod. Expect it.
Get ready, people. Andrew, just out of curiosity, have you been tracking this stuff to the degree that we have?
I'm trying to stay out of it as much as possible.
That is smart. I wish I had chosen that 6 months ago.
Oh, yeah.
I can respect that. Okay, let's move on then. We'll continue to wait. More out of DC. So apparently, Jim Jordan is investigating Omnicom Interpublic's proposed acquisition merger because of their involvement in GARM. So this was a little weird. Funny enough, the New York Post broke the article, but effectively, they're investigating this and trying to make sure that the two companies didn't have any involvement in GARM because I guess, kind of like extrapolating what could happen if these are now, effectively the largest agency in the world and has ties to GARM and its, proposed or supposed support of left-leaning versus right-leaning sources. There could be bad things to come from a media investment standpoint. Is that basically the concern here?
Yeah, Jim Jordan's been advocating this right-wing talking point that their voices are being suppressed by social media and by groups like GARM, which doesn't exist anymore because the actual most powerful person in the world, Elon Musk, destroyed them. And so I think the lesson here is you may want to stay out of politics, but politics is not going to stay away from you.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, how much of a thing is this? Because GARM is no more, right?
Look, I think that the policy of the incoming administration and the Republicans, not to get all political here, but they're going to treat the media like a whipping boy and get it to do what they want. They work the refs. That's what it's called. They work the refs. They know the media has a big influence. So by constantly harassing them, and, by the way, Disney and ABC just gave up on a bogus defamation suit against Trump and ended up paying him $15 million as capitulation. So there's a clear trend here where the media feels like they have to do what the incoming regime wants them to do.
It's absolutely working the refs and getting everyone to capitulate. And guess what? It's working because they've already had the biggest CEOs in the world kissing their ring.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. I guess we'll just keep going on this front. The Supreme Court agrees to hear the case over the TikTok ban. So this thing is heating up. What's your take, Ari?
Yeah, so TikTok lost their case to stop the ban from happening. This is an interesting legal case. It's between the balance of free speech versus national security. I've listened to other podcasts where they know more than I do, where they've said that usually national security wins these kind of arguments, and that the Supreme Court is pretty hesitant to overturn a bill that was signed by overwhelming majorities of both Congress and the president. So it's interesting that they took the case in the first place. They have not made a decision. They're doing this on a fast track because I think the deadline is January 19th, exactly a month from now, than when it's supposed to take place. So it's pretty interesting that they took it. And I think the other thing is that Trump has been saying things which are, kind of reconciliatory a bit towards TikTok. Not totally saying what he's going to do, but he's not on the warpath trying to execute this law and kick them out. So it's a pretty interesting mix of feedback that we've heard so far.
And timing, right? Like January 19th versus January 20th.
I think they made that on purpose. I think Congress really did some rat effing on this one. They wanted to make it after the election, but before someone had to take blame for it.
I think Biden can punt it down the road a few months, though, right?
I'm not sure he can. I think it actually is supposed to happen on January 19th.
Wow. That's so crazy. All right. One last non-ad tech, but maybe ad tech related thing that we should talk about here. So Ozzy Media, this case has been out there for some time. The CEO, his name is Carlos Watson. He was sentenced to nearly 10 years in prison, found guilty of conspiracy to commit securities fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. In practice, and this story is wild, folks should read some of the coverage of this, as part of their raising money, communicating to investors, trying to raise more money, they lied about everything possible in their business. How much money they raised, how much money they had committed, how much revenue they had pending. They even impersonated a YouTube exec on a diligence call with investors. As an investor, I'm glad to see this happen because this is just unacceptable. All right, I'm speechless now. I cannot believe this actually happened. And I'm happy that he was found guilty and is going to prison for a long time because we can't allow this stuff.
I just love the fact that he joined a conference call and changed his voice. He's yeah, actually, I'm from YouTube. I love Ozzy. It's the funniest part of this whole story.
And that's conspiracy to commit wire fraud right there, folks. Do not do this stuff.
The signs of this, when I look back, actually were evident years and years ago. I was at Comscore and I had a lot of journalists asking me. They were obsessed with Ozzy Media and asking for their numbers and stuff. And I just remember I was like, what is the hype here? I've never seen this come up in a social media feed. I have no knowledge of this brand whatsoever. And it was obviously something in media circles. And then the numbers started to inflate, but it never really matched reality. Every time you see something where the numbers don't seem to match the reality in front of your face, just start asking questions.
Yeah, that's always a sign. So, Eric, how do you avoid intentional fraud in diligence? It's very easy to find mistakes in diligence, but when someone is really trying to deceive you, it seems very difficult to find in the sort of diligence that you would do in an investment.
Yeah, I mean, this is the biggest nightmare for an investor. From our perspective, and in our process, it's a couple things. Number one, I think being so sector focused, we have a bit of an advantage here because, we're close to everyone and we can do real diligence. We would, in this case, know the person at YouTube and call them personally on their cell phone versus asking the CEO for the phone number of, proposed YouTube exec. So I think, number one, from our perspective, you need to get as close as possible to the source of information. Number two, I think as I've found in diligence, oftentimes venture capitalists are fairly lightweight in terms of what they ask for. So actually seeing contracts, actually seeing bank records, having that in a data room, I think something like this should be a wake-up call for folks to make that standard operating procedure.
I think especially at later rounds, if you're a B or C investor, you've got to see that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And again, I think some of the larger investors, they just make the standard operating procedure.
But what Andrew says is so true. If you see a publisher or a publishing group that's climbing up the charts as huge numbers and you've never seen it in the wild, you've never read an article from them or watched a video from them, it's a huge red flag.
Absolutely. Just think about just the MFA and the way that traffic is bought. And you see there's just weird metrics on a site you've never heard of. And it's got such low traffic, but just high referral to your campaign. This stuff is just really easy to weed out.
This is the story of digital advertising. It's gaming metrics. So much of it is built on finding ways to game metrics. And some cases are worse than others.
Yeah. Well, do this and go to jail. Anyway, let's shift gears. AppLovin. We've been talking about AppLovin for some time now. And there was a really good BI article. Shout out to Laura. Just talking about why is it so hot, some of the questions around it, and then there's an interesting theory about an acquisition that they should make. So background here, AppLovin has been on an absolute tear with their core business for a year now. recently they started basically like opening up their inventory to non-endemic. For them, endemics are just like game developers. Started opening up their inventory footprint to e-commerce advertisers. And it's been going great. So according to the article, they're offering like a free credit program of like $10,000 if a brand has the capacity to spend up to $20,000 per day. So they're targeting like big e-com spenders. And according to some of the data, it's working. So there was some data actually, ironically, from a portfolio company of ours, Prescient AI, said that AppLovin delivered a 1.5 times higher return on ad spend for its customers that were testing this than Meta and Google AdWords on average. And the top spenders are spending 25 to 30% of their budgets on AppLovin, something that, again, this company hasn't seen before, except for something like TV, where brands will intentionally bulk up spending over the holidays. So it's a unique inventory footprint. It's a scaled inventory footprint. It's working for e-com. So you're kind of thing one. Thing two, the theory that this article pointed out is they need to, go beyond the app inventory footprint. So they floated the idea of AppLovin buying Snap, which I thought was like a potential like killer move and something they could very easily have the capacity to do. So number one, what do you think about this, product of, basically taking AppLovin and its core business, opening up to e-com? Can this continue to scale? And then number two, AppLovin by Snap. What do you think of that?
Well, Snap's controlled by Evan, and he hasn't shown any interest in selling in the past. So, I mean, it's good to speculate, but like it's up to Evan if he wants to sell or not. So AppLovin is kind of the talk of the ad tech Twitter types, and people back channel to me and they're like, hey, can you get on the phone? I need to talk to you. And then they have some weird conspiracy theory about how AppLovin works. So let me summarize the theories that are going around. None of this is no facts. These are just rumors that are going around, and I will order them in, least to most offensive. The least offensive is that they're just running an ad network model and they share their data between clients so that when one customer gets results in e-commerce, they could just start showing ads for the other customer to the same users, the same apps. And it's sort of a co-op. And there's nothing wrong with that as long as you're okay with your data being used to help your competitors and they have enough scale to make it work. That's like the most innocent explanation for how AppLovin's working. The slightly more sinister is the same thing, but they're extensively fingerprinting people. So fingerprinting is not allowed in the Apple ecosystem, but Apple does not enforce that in any way. And that puts Google and Facebook at a disadvantage because Google and Facebook are not willing to do it because they don't want to get into a multi-trillion-dollar lawsuit with Apple. But someone like AppLovin could take the risk and they do it extensively. And so they have an information advantage over the big guys because they're willing to do what they're not willing to by policy. And then the most sinister explanation has been going around on Twitter a bit is because AppLovin owns Max, which is effectively what they call in mobile the unified auction, but really it's like a header bidding wrapper. They get information from all the bidders that are on the apps, and they're somehow using that to either steal data from people like Facebook or more likely just game attribution so that they know which users are likely to convert based on who else is bidding, and they just like trail the wake and show ads to those users and get some credit. Those are the theories going around as to AppLovin's success.
I'm going to jump on that last one because that's where my head was kind of landing. It's just another, could be a version of gaming attribution. The first thing for me was, well, first off, it's starting to become a retail media play, right? Because they're getting into e-commerce. So I had to start paying attention. $100 billion company based on the mobile advertising market. Like right away, something doesn't smell right to me because mobile advertising is by far where there's the most fraud, most impressions that might take credit for attribution. And so that's where my initial skepticism comes in. And then if I'm understanding correctly, it kind of sounds like a DMAX sort of mechanism where it's a black box. I don't know why any advertiser would ever put their money into something where they can't see where the ads actually run. You have to know what site. And if they're hiding it from you, there's a reason they're hiding it from you. So I just think everybody should think twice before they put any money into a black box.
Let's talk about this. So from what I understand, it's PMAX-like in terms of it's a kind of like set it and forget it performance algorithm campaign. I'm not sure if brands get reporting over like where the ads are actually running within the various apps. Sort of thing one, and maybe somebody can, point that out to us. Thing two is, from what I understand, the unit itself is a full screen interstitial type of unit. When somebody is playing a game, they have a template where it's, like a video plus, click here, call to action, buy the thing immediately. So I can imagine a scenario where this is actually working, right? People, see something cool, it's targeted well to them, they buy the thing. I think, Andrew, your point is, should AppLovin, get all of the credit for this, or was just this, the last exposure that ended up kind of putting them over the line?
That's the strongest case, in my opinion, which is that it is a unique unit that could potentially be very effective.
I've seen it. Yeah. I've seen it.
Well, I mean, those units have been around forever, though. I mean, at Beeswax, we were buying full screen, interstitial, rewarded, and IDFA still existed back then. And no one could get performance. Like the performance in mobile open performance was like the hardest nut to crack for anybody.
Yep. Again, bull case is this is a highly engaged user base. It skews, a little bit older, right? People with money, a little bit female. And if you read the BI article, which again, everybody should read if they can, they point to like beauty brands and female focused brands like pouring money into this thing. So again, that's the bull case. I totally understand where you guys are both coming from in terms of the details here.
I think one of the more interesting companies we don't talk about a lot is Moloko. Moloko is not an ad network, I don't think. They're running a mobile install DSP, and they also have a retail media play that is optimizing bids on retail. Andrew, have you run into their retail product?
Yeah, I know the folks in Moloko. I have to say, this is what they're doing with on-site in retail media is actually great. There's so much unoptimized inventory, poor search ad relevance. Like that's the easy money for most RMNs, and they're not. It's like the gold in their backyards, and they're not getting it today. So that's actually
what are they doing?
Yeah, it's a machine learning ad tech that basically can take the data on these sites and help them better optimize their inventory. And they run through a series of machine learning optimizations that helps them extract the value that's there that they're not currently extracting, which, again, this is not their core competency. So most RMNs should probably be outsourcing most of their tech. Teams outsource tech.
My understanding is that Moloko has taken sort of a different approach to the retailer problem, where instead of giving them tools to make their SKUs available for bidding, they take more of a black box. They're like, we're going to build you, AdSense for your site. We're just going to make the right ads show up, and you're going to make more money. So it's a little bit more, a little less ad serving, and a little bit more like full optimization.
If it's somebody on the site and they convert, though, there's I think less room for it to be something where it's just taking credit.
I'd love to have someone on. I mean, I know some people there. We should have someone on from Moloko.
Agreed. Want to call it there? All right.
Actually, I need to give a shout out because Lumen did a deal with IAS for attention measurement, and I'm only giving them a shout out because they were pissed off that we had Mark Gilsman from Adelaide on the show and didn't give them sort of equal time. That's not what we're about, but I'm very impressed with Lumen, which is a first party capital company that does attention metrics. They have a really interesting product, and they're a rival of Adelaide. So congratulations to Lumen for doing the deal with IAS, and now we're even. All right. It was a great show. Thank you so much, Andrew, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, and we're skipping next week for Christmas, so we'll be back right before New Year's with our year-end wrap-up.
We won't see you next week, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you for subscribing to Marketecture. New interviews are added every week at marketecture.tv and your favorite podcasting app.
Thank you for listening to the Marketecture podcast. New episodes come out every Friday, and an insightful vendor interview is published each Monday. You can subscribe to our library of hundreds of executive interviews at marketecture.tv. You can also sign up for free for our weekly newsletter with my original strategic insights on the week's news at news.marketecture.tv. And if you're feeling social, we operate a vibrant Slack community that you can apply to join at adtechgod.com.